everyone, it's Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and today I'm sharing with you the art play that I did today on the Art Joy of Sharing live stream show. Peg Robinson and I live stream every Thursday at 10:30 Central, 8:30 Pacific time. And today the show is about new to us products and playing with them, and I decided to play with acrylic inks because I just ordered some Matisse brand Pam Carriker inks, and I wanted to play with them. And then I also have this set of 6 basic colors from Liquitex. So I was exploring the difference between acrylic inks, India inks, and fluid acrylic paint because I wondered. I tried different types of papers. I tried different techniques, and that was what I did today on the live stream. So I'm showing you a speed up voiceover version. So the first thing I did was, well, first of all, I forgot to turn on my secondary camera at the very beginning, but I had some mixed media paper, and 2 of the pieces had a sloppy coat of gesso and 2 of the pieces did not. And I wanted to see with the acrylic ink what would happen. So the first thing I did was I made some very watery washes, one on the gessoed paper and one on the non-gessoed paper. And then I tried to remove through a stencil the acrylic ink using some alcohol, some 91% alcohol. And it did work on the one that has a gessoed background. It didn't work so well on the other one. Then my next experiment was to take some gessoed and non-gessoed mixed media paper and to use water on it and to just write with the droppers inside and to see how fluid and how much it would move like a watercolor with water, and what the difference would be between a gessoed and non-gessoed surface. Now, you can definitely use acrylic ink like a watercolor, but the magical thing about it for mixed media artists is that it dries permanent. It's light fast, it's archival, and it's permanent. So what is acrylic ink? Acrylic ink is a pigment dissolved in either a resin emulsion or a polymer emulsion. So it's like an acrylic paint, but it's so thinned out that you can use it in a dip pen, you can use it in an airbrush, and also most of the colors are very translucent because they're so thin. How is that different from something like a golden high flow or a DecoArt mixed media fluid paint? Well, those are a little bit thicker and more opaque. Also, if you try to put one of those without putting airbrush medium in it, if you try a fluid paint in an airbrush, it won't work. So the inks are definitely more fluid than fluid paint, but they work in the same way as fluid paint. They can be mixed with other acrylic products like gesso, like texture medium, any of the mediums you can mix it in. You can use them on top of acrylic paint. You can use them in all different ways. So there were a few things that I discovered as I was playing today that I really like about them. And otherwise, there was maybe, well, there wasn't anything I didn't like about them. There was a few things about some of the papers that I used that I didn't like. And this paper that I'm using right now to experiment is from Arteza brand, and it's called Acrylic Paper Pad. And it's like it's a thick paper that's been pressed to have a canvas texture on it. But what I discovered is that it doesn't play well with water. So if you're going to do a watery thing like I'm doing here, I wouldn't recommend that Arteza acrylic paper. It's definitely designed to paint with acrylic paints, which aren't very fluid on it. But I was spraying tons of water, and as I was doing this, just testing the inks to see how they blend and how they move on this paper, it really did soak into the paper even all the way through the back. So didn't like that paper with the acrylic ink. I did like the things I was doing otherwise. So then I decided to switch to watercolor paper to test out watercolor paper. This is a 300-pound cold pressed watercolor paper. And I got out a little tiny pipette. Now, these acrylic inks all have a dropper inside, but it's a thick, heavy dropper. And I thought, what would it be like to apply it with a smaller dropper? So I'm using this very tiny, I think it's a 1 milliliter pipette, plastic. And I had a kind of a fake stencil made out of cardstock that I had done with die cuts, and I put that over my watercolor paper, and then I just scratchily drew around each shape in my cardboard stencil with this color called Nightfall. It's gorgeous, gorgeous color from Pam Carriker, Matisse inks. Loved how that turned out. I dragged out the pigment using a watercolor brush and some water, and it granulated on the paper and was really pretty. So I was really happy with that on watercolor paper. So then I just filled in my stars. I did a little bit of splattering with the inside of the titanium white one, and then I filled in the stars with the yellow. Those are the Liquitex ones. So then I thought, how do they work with a stencil? So I got out another piece of watercolor paper and a stencil, and I'm just dripping the acrylic inks over the stencil. And I'm realizing pretty quick before I even lift up the stencil that these are too watery to stencil with, unless you spray the stencil with a stencil adhesive and stick it down. It's basically just running under the stencil, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, I knew it was going to be like that, but I tried it anyway because, hey, I have a lot of stencils and I like to play with them. So I'm putting a lot of water on there, and it's getting very watery, and I'm losing all my stencil-ish shapes by doing that. And then I'm blotting it with some paper towel, but when I lift it up, you can see it's still very interesting looking, but there isn't a lot of the stencil design. But then when I turned it over and pressed the stencil onto some, the other side of the stencil onto some deli paper, I got an interesting stencil print on the deli paper. So that'll be fun to use. Both of these will be fun to use. So then I didn't even wait for it to dry. I just kind of blotted it a little bit, and then I brought the stencil back, and I got a stencil brush out and some of the titanium white acrylic ink, and I tried stenciling over the top of it just to get some of that white space back. Of course, this is still wet, and so all I'm getting is basically a lighter color of the same colors that are in the stencil, but it did make for an interesting, it'll be an interesting background for something. So that's on watercolor paper. So yeah, I could do some more stenciling over the top of that, or I could, do something else over the top. So this star one is the one that I like the best, but you can see how the other pieces came out. So then I also wanted to try it with texture mediums. So I tried it with 3 different types of texture medium. The first one was heavy gesso. The second one was DecoArt molding paste. And the third one is golden light molding paste. And I put them on, used the same stencil, which is Circles in the Sand by Stencil Girl Beverly Stout, I believe. It's a new stencil that I have, and I just really like it. I think it's really cool. So you can see the 3 different ones. The one closest to the left is the golden light molding paste. The one I'm putting ink on right now is the DecoArt molding paste, or modeling paste, I think it's called. And then the one all the way to the right is the heavy gesso. And all those were pressed through a stencil and allowed to dry. So then I'm applying the acrylic ink and spraying it with water and letting it drip down. And with the one with the DecoArt that I just showed, the modeling paste from DecoArt, it dries clear, and then it's kind of almost like a resist. So as the acrylic ink went over it, it resisted and left white space which was very different than what happened with the golden light molding paste, because the golden light molding paste is almost like a sponge, and it sort of absorbed the ink as it was dripping down. And so I got almost an opposite effect between those two different mediums, which interested me a lot. They did not come out the same, which is what I was trying to find out. And I definitely want, from now on, when I use molding paste or modeling paste or whatever you want to call it, depending on the brand, I'm definitely going to use it with acrylic ink, because I got a lot more of the interesting texture than I do when I try to use like a high flow fluid acrylic. It's too opaque with the fluid acrylic, and it covers up my texture, and it doesn't run down in between like I want it to. So the one I actually liked best is this one at the end, which is with heavy gesso. And it just turned out really cool. So I can see a lot of texture, but they're all very different, depending on the different mediums I used with the acrylic ink. So then I decided to do an art journal page because, hey, gotta have something done. All I'm doing is experiments and I'm not finishing anything. So I got out my book that's made with, well, it's made with Stencil Girl products, stencil mailers, the chipboard, cardboard stuff, and then they have gesso on every page, stuck together with washi tape tabs. And the first thing I did, and by the way, there's gesso on every page, so these should be resistant. So I got out a stencil and I put some red and some yellow. I didn't have an orange, and that's really what I wanted, was orange, but I didn't have it. So I got out yellow and red and kind of brushed them on. And then I'm taking a baby wipe and removing some of the color, trying to get some pattern with the stencil. And then I thought, well, that's not working very good, so I'll try to add some pattern. That didn't work very good either. Slick surface, not enough ink. And I thought, you know what? What I'm really enjoying with these acrylic inks is applying them either with the dropper that's inside or a pipette. That's really my favorite thing that I enjoyed doing today. So I decided to just continue on with that type of an application by just applying some of the yellow and some of the white, and then moving it around with a wet brush, like a watercolor, because it's basically acrylic watercolor. And then I got out the tiny pipette and I thought, I will draw with it. That will be fun. I will draw with it, and then I will blend a little bit with a brush. So I'm just drawing these abstract, very abstract flower shapes. On my first go round, I didn't really like the one that I made down in the lower right hand side, so I just kind of removed it with the baby wipe and blended around a little bit more, which did make too much red on my background and not enough contrast, but it's too late now. So then I got out the pipette and I drew some more shapes. That's a lot of fun. You really get a painterly look doing it with the pipette because you don't have a lot of control. It's not a paintbrush. You can't paint it. You know, it's scribbly, scratchy, but very interesting look. Very, yeah, painterly. So then I got out my wet brush and I blended a little bit of it just because I like the way the water wicks the acrylic and makes it look more like a watercolor. So added in the center a little bit of the raw sienna color. There was a big puddle, so I was removing a big puddle down here at the bottom. But I was just having fun making these very abstracted flowers, interesting shapes, and allowing them to blend out a little bit with water. Varying degrees of water gives you, you know, more transparency or less transparency, depending on what you do. And I liked that. That was fun. So then I dried it up and decided that flowers need stems and foliage. And so I'm doing that again with the tiny 1 milliliter pipette and the sienna color acrylic. And that's a lot of fun. I'm making very painterly, very abstracted shapes. You can't help but do that. And then I added some centers with the white uh, to the center of the flowers. And I just moved on from there, adding some colors in the background. I hope you're enjoying this video and are thinking about maybe getting some acrylic inks and playing with them because it's a lot of fun. Um, if you liked it, please give me a thumbs up or leave me a comment or question below. Subscribe, of course, that always helps. And you can turn on your notification bells. You can share this or pin it on Pinterest. All those things really help my channel grow, so I'm very appreciative of those things. So I'm adding in some of the turquoise color from the Matisse Pam Carriker colors to the background because I like the contrast between the red and the greenish blue. Red and green are contrasting colors on the color wheel, so it kind of helps the red stand out by having a little bit of green background. So I'm just adding that with a wet brush. I've put a drop of it onto my palette. And then what did I do? I think I thought I needed to blot and then decided I didn't like the blotting and had to add back in some. I know I got out the sienna again and used the larger eyedropper to add in a little bit more foliage that's kind of thicker. You know, sometimes you like to have thicker and thinner lines. It makes it more dynamic. And you definitely get a thicker line if you use the dropper instead of the small, tiny pipette. So that added more drama, I think. And then I think I added some white drops using the dropper in the titanium white one, maybe. Maybe that's what happened. I'm not sure. Oh, I did scratch around a little bit with instead of slurping up the ink into the pipette, I just used it kind of a scratchy tool and I dipped it in the pool of the turquoise and then scratched around with it a bit to make more marks. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time doing this very abstracted page in this little homemade journal. So yeah, I hope you liked it. There will be close-up photos at the end. And thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.